When the last log truck pulled out of Dry Fork in May of 2020, it left Mae Kincaid standing beside 29 stumps, not little ones. The black walnut near the old spring house spread almost 6 feet from root crown to root crown. 3 contractors looked at it and gave her 3 versions of the same answer. $27,000 to make the problem disappear. Mae's father had written something different. On the back of a mill tally sheet, in pencil, he had called that swollen wood below the cut the part the mill never gets. Mae was 44 years old that spring. She prepared payroll and quarterly taxes for small contractors in McDowell and Mercer counties, mostly from a second-hand desk in the back room of her house. She was not a timber buyer. She was not a furniture maker. She did not own a sawmill. What she owned was 39 acres in a narrow West Virginia hollow, a worn Ford pickup, $41,000 left on a land note, and a stack of papers her father had saved because he believed numbers only became useful after somebody bothered to keep them. The tract had belonged to Mae's grandparents. It passed through 2 uncles, a divorce, and 1 tax sale before she borrowed enough to buy it back in 2016. The place was steep where it was dry and wet where it was flat. A spring ran under the lower road. The upper slope was shale and thin soil. The only asset a bank could easily understand was the standing timber. So when a logging company offered Mae $18,600 for selected walnut, red oak, and poplar, she signed. The contract covered the merchantable trunks. It did not cover the root crowns. It did not cover cleanup beyond the haul roads. And it certainly did not cover 29 stumps cut low enough to catch a bush hog and high enough to stop anything with an axle. By June, Mae had heard every practical solution. Grind them, pull them, burn them where the county allowed it, push dirt over the smaller ones and quit looking at them. The cheapest written estimate was $19,400. The highest was $31,000, because an excavator operator from Bluefield said the walnut by the spring house would require a bigger machine, a second truck, and probably a new section of road. Mae wrote each number in a yellow legal pad. Then she drew a line under all 3. Removal cost. That was the question every man had answered. It was not the question her father had left behind. Cal Kincaid had spent 26 years at a hardwood mill outside Princeton. He began on the green chain, pulling wet boards beneath fluorescent lights that made every night shift look like morning. Later, he became a saw filer. A good filer could hear a problem before most men could see it. A blade running wrong had a pitch to it. A tooth out of line left a pattern in the cut. Cal listened, stopped the machine, and found the reason. He never became a grader, but he watched graders. He watched them chalk defects on oak. He watched them turn plain walnut boards over. Because figures sometimes hid on the side, nobody bothered to face upward. He watched buyers pay by board foot until the grain became unusual. Then they stopped buying wood by volume and started buying it by the piece. Cal wrote that down, not as a lesson for Mae, not as a plan. Just because he had a habit of keeping anything that seemed likely to matter later. After he died in 2018, Mae found his mill papers in a steel lunchbox under the basement stairs. There were blade numbers, shift totals, sketches of tooth angles, and short notes squeezed into margins. Fence-grown walnut may carry iron. Root flare compresses grain. Feather starts where straight lumber ends. And on the back of one tally sheet, beside a rough map of the family hollow, he had circled the tree near the spring house. Black walnut, storm lean, wide crown. Root wood worth seeing. Mae had read those words before the logging crew arrived. She had not understood them until the crew left the stump. The public library in Welch opened at 10. Mae was waiting outside on the first Tuesday in June. She spent that morning searching sold listings, not asking prices. That distinction mattered to a woman who made her living reconciling other people's books. She found walnut dining slabs. She found matched guitar backs. She found bowl blanks with black lines twisting through the grain. She found a specialty lumber dealer in Ohio selling figured root sections by photograph because no two pieces could be priced the same way. A plain walnut board was measured. Figured walnut was judged. That difference held her attention. Over the next 2 weeks, Mae made 11 phone calls. A luthier in Roanoke told her instrument makers wanted stable wood more than dramatic wood, but the best pieces could be both. A furniture builder in Charleston said, root flare often carried feather, curl, and color that never reached the straight trunk above it. A turner in Lexington warned her that buried wire could destroy chains and stain walnut dark around the metal. And a salvage mill operator named Wade Kress told her something nobody who quoted stump removal had mentioned. You don't have to pull the whole root system, he said. You have to expose enough clean wood to decide whether the crown is inventory or firewood. Mae wrote that sentence below the removal bids. Inventory or firewood. Those were better categories. Wade owned a hydraulic slabber mounted on a short trailer and a chain mill with a bar nearly as long as Mae was tall. He charged by the day, plus blades, chains, and travel. He did not promise value. He promised a clean look inside. On the last Monday of June, he backed through the upper gate before sunrise. The air smelled like wet stone and tulip poplar leaves. Mae had already dug around the springhouse stump with a mattock, clearing mud from the first 12 inches of root flare. Wade walked around it twice. He pressed a magnet against the gray bark on the roadside. Nothing. He tapped the cut face with the handle of a wrench. Nothing. Then he looked at Mae. Old fence line? Before my grandfather moved it. Then we assume there is steel until the wood proves otherwise. The first cut took 43 minutes. Wet walnut came away in a slab nearly 4 inches thick, too heavy for 2 people to lift without the tractor forks. The grain was broad and brown with a pale outer band, pretty, not rare. The second slab showed a stronger sweep where the roots had pushed against the hill. Wade washed the surface with water from a garden sprayer. Dark lines appeared. Mae could see the beginning of the feather her father had described, but it broke apart near the center. The third cut began just after noon. The chain had traveled less than 2 feet when the sound changed. It went from a steady pull to a hard metallic scream. Wade shut the saw down. A broken cutter lay in the sawdust. Inside the stump, a blue-black stain spread from a square piece of steel, an old gate staple. Driven into the tree decades earlier, swallowed by bark, then carried inward as the walnut grew around it. The chain was ruined. The bar was scarred, and the stain ran farther than either of them could see. Wade sat on the tractor tire and calculated the damage. A replacement chain. Lost hours. A second pass from the opposite side. Possibly more metal. Mae had already spent $1,900 on clearing, equipment time, and the first day of cutting. Rain was forecast overnight. If the lower road softened, Wade's trailer might not get back in for a week. He told her the safe decision was to stop, not forever, just until she knew whether she wanted to keep paying to discover bad news. That was the first time the stump looked like the problem everybody said it was. Not when the contractors gave her the estimates, not when she stood among 29 obstacles. It looked like a problem when the one piece of evidence she trusted most, her father's note, was trapped behind steel. Mae went to the house and brought back the lunchbox. She unfolded Cal's map on the hood of the pickup. The circle around the walnut was not centered on the roadside. It sat uphill toward the spring. Next to it, he had drawn one short arrow, compression side. Wade studied the page, then looked at the lean of the stump. A tree leaning toward open light lays down reaction wood where the roots hold hardest. The fence staple was on the downhill side. Cal's arrow pointed away from it. Mae asked what one more cut would cost. Wade told her. She wrote the number down. Then she said, "Cut the side he marked." They rotated the mill. The rain reached the upper ridge while the chain was still moving. Water darkened the sawdust. The new slab separated slowly, held at one corner by a ribbon of fiber. When Wade finally freed it, the two of them stood without speaking. The figure opened from the center in two long mirrored wings. Not a straight cathedral, not burl eyes. A feather, dense at the root, widening through the brown hardwood, crossed by thin black mineral lines that stopped before the edge. The old staple had damaged one side of the stump. It had not touched the part Cal marked. Wade sprayed the slab. The grain sharpened under the water. Mae put her hand on the wet surface. For the first time, she understood that her father had not left her an answer. He had left her a place to look. They cut until the road began to shine with rain. From that single root crown, Wade recovered 5 large slabs, 6 shorter figured sections, and a cluster of clean blocks from the uphill roots. 2 slabs were too checked for furniture. One contained another rust pocket. The best pair matched through the center like open pages. Mae paid Wade $3,280 for 2 days, damaged chain included. That number frightened her. So did the weight of green walnuts stacked in the machine shed. Wood that wet could twist. It could split. It could grow mold. It could dry beautifully and still fail a moisture test 2 years later. Value was not inside the stump anymore. Now it depended on patience. Mae built the drying stack herself. Concrete blocks off the floor, level runners, dry stickers every 16 inches. Weight on top. Box fans set to move air, not blast it. She painted the slab ends with wax emulsion and wrote the date on each piece. June 30th, 2020. Then she measured them the way she had seen lumber dealers do it. Length, average width, thickness, visible checks, metal stain, figure location. She photographed every slab wet and dry. She did not call them perfect. She did not call them rare. She described what she could prove. During the next 4 months, Mae sent a short inventory sheet to 63 makers, not mass furniture companies. People whose work depended on unusual wood. Guitar builders, custom stair shops, architectural woodworkers, turners. Small studios making 1 table at a time. 38 never answered. 12 asked for more photographs. 6 wanted moisture updates. 3 offered deposits if Mae would give them first refusal after the slabs reached stable moisture. By November, the deposits totaled $5,600, enough to cover Wade, the broken chain, the drying supplies, and a winter repair to the machine shed roof. The money did not make the slabs finished. It made the waiting survivable. Mae kept working. She processed payroll on Mondays. She filed quarterly reports. Once a month, she checked the Walnut with a pin meter and recorded the readings beside the same lines where Cal had written about root compression. She also looked at the other 28 stumps. Most were not black walnut. Most were not secretly valuable. That mattered. A good story can make one discovery sound like a rule. Mae refused to confuse the two. She marked 4 red oak crowns with promising ray pattern. She sold 2 poplar stumps in place to a chainsaw carver who wanted pale, easy-cut wood for festival sculptures. She left 8 stumps untouched on the steep bank because their roots were holding soil above the spring road. She cut drainage around 3 others instead of removing them, and she paid Wade to open only the crowns that gave her a reason. By the spring of 2021, she had milled 9 stumps. By the fall, the best walnut slabs went to a small dehumidification kiln in Beckley for a controlled finishing cycle. The kiln bill was calculated by board foot. Mae checked it twice. The matched feather pair came out flat. 1 narrow split at an end. No hidden metal. Moisture steady enough for interior work. The first buyer to inspect them in person was Adrian Vale, a furniture maker from Charlottesville. He had seen the photographs for 14 months. He brought a straight edge, a moisture meter, and no enthusiasm he was willing to show in advance. He examined both faces. He marked the end split with chalk. He studied the black mineral lines. Then he stepped back far enough to see the pair together. "They look like wings," he said. Mae told him they looked like a ledger opened down the middle. Adrian bought them for $7,800. He used the pair for a 12-foot conference table in a renovated railroad hotel. He sent Mae a photograph after installation. The table sat under old brick arches. The feather figure ran outward from the center seam exactly as it had opened in the rain. Mae printed the picture and slid it into the steel lunchbox. The smaller root sections followed a different path. A guitar maker in Roanoke bought 18 matched billets after rejecting 7 that moved too much during drying. A turner in Kentucky bought the rust-stained blocks because the blue-black reaction around the buried staple gave the bowls a line no pigment could imitate. A stair builder in Charleston bought 2 long curved sections for newel posts. Nothing sold because Mae called it waste transformed into treasure. It sold because she cut carefully, dried slowly, documented honestly, and matched each piece to a buyer who understood what it could do. By the end of 2023, gross receipts from lumber, billets, turning stock, and in-place carving wood reached $43,900. Milling, roadwork, drying, equipment, and transport cost $9,760. The land note was not erased by one magical slab. It was paid down by a sequence of ordinary decisions that happened to begin with one unusual piece of wood. Mae used part of the margin to fix the spring road. She installed 2 water bars above the lower turn. She fenced a half-acre garden away from deer. She paid the land note off in February of 2024. The 29 stumps never became 29 paydays. 11 produced saleable wood. 4 were sold in place. 8 remained where their roots protected the slope. The rest were cut low, worked around, or allowed to soften back into the ground. Mae never paid a contractor to make all of them disappear. That was the deeper mistake in the first estimates. They treated the land as though every obstacle had to be removed before the property could become useful. Mae treated each stump as a separate question. Some were inventory. Some were structure. Some were firewood. Some were nothing more than time returning wood to soil. And one held a pair of walnut wings beneath an old piece of steel. Wade Kress told the story afterward. Usually when a landowner asked him for a price before asking him what he saw, he would point out that heavy equipment is excellent at answering a certain kind of question. How fast can this be moved? How deep can this be pulled? How much will it cost to clear? Machines answer those questions with force. They do not ask whether the thing in the way is carrying evidence. Mae Kincaid had spent half his life beside saws powerful enough to turn trees into dimensions. But what he noticed was the moment measurement stopped being enough. The place where grain bent. The place where pressure wrote itself into wood. The place the mill never got. Mae still keeps his tally sheets in the steel lunchbox. Her own records are in a black binder beside it now. Moisture readings, buyer names, kiln receipts, photographs, and one legal pad with 3 stump removal estimates crossed out in blue ink. Below them, in Mae's handwriting, are the 2 categories that changed the property, inventory or firewood. Her father's words are written beneath those. The stump was never what the tree left behind. It was the part the mill never got.